Chapter 8. Consume Art. TV and video games are a waste of time, right? Shouldn't time wasters be something you should avoid? To be fair, leisure activities can be a major time sink if you engage in them rather than do your work. However, they are something that we all need. Everyone needs some downtime to unwind and relax. Everyone needs to be able to enjoy an experience for its own sake. More than that, as an artist, you need to dedicate time to the consumption of art. Your aesthetic sensibilities don't exist in a vacuum where no inputs are needed to produce quality work. Artists need to be experiencing other art to have a sense of what art is supposed to be. A musician cannot create music without having heard music, for example. So no, TV and video games are not necessarily wastes of time. They are art, which means they can be something necessary for the life of an artist, for inspiration as well as for gaining a deeper appreciation of craft. I personally struggle with my relationship with media consumption, in that I tend to ignore it as a need and spend my time instead on work, or I tend to focus entirely on consuming something and put my work on the back burner. I'm at my best when I actively make time to consume and enjoy art, but put it in its proper place in my schedule. Efficiency isn't always efficient. One of the most important lessons I've learned over the last 20 years is that I cannot have 100% uptime when it comes to productivity. I suspect that nobody can, because I haven't yet met anyone that can, ever. I've only met people who excel at managing their time, not people who can work without any need for leisure. If I try to have 100% uptime, I get burned out. I can work exceptionally hard for a limited amount of time, say 6 weeks max, as I've talked about before. But after that time, work starts to become miserable and I long to do something that is fun in and of itself. I'll take a break, read books, and play games for a week, then feel anxious that I'm wasting my days not progressing toward my goals. And then I end up in an annoying cycle. Sprints shouldn't be a normal state of affairs. I also notice that when I focus on spending all of my free time working, my cognitive capacity begins to diminish. Although I'm efficient with my time when it comes to maximizing the time during the day spent on work, I'm not being efficient within the time I'm working. My mind starts to drift and slow down. I get sleepy or bored, or feel like my sentences are not flowing from the ether of my mind in the way I'm used to. Basically, I can't get in the zone when I'm trying to push for maximum uptime. I've learned this lesson many times in many different capacities over the years, but I keep making the mistake of thinking, this time I'm going to put my nose to the grindstone and get it done. No breaks! It doesn't usually work out, except in short bursts. I first learned this as a music composition student. Being highly dedicated to productive output even back then, I would force myself to sit at a computer for hours on end and not get much done. I found that if I took a break every hour, even for 5 minutes, and talked to other students or just read a book in the hallway, always away from the computer, I would be more efficient when I sat down to work. Because of the intensity of my schedule, these breaks were often to the vending machine in the middle of the night, but even then, they were effective. I liken it to washing off your palette in painting, or cleansing your palette in culinary terms. When you wash the paint off your palette, you have to remix all of your colors for your painting. Removing the drying leftovers of your current set of mixes can make you see what you are doing from a new angle by forcing you to rethink your color choices. In this analogy, the palette is my mind, and the colors are the sounds and melodies I am using to create music. If I took a break when composing music, my mind would stop working on the current problem, like a tough counterpoint section, and new ideas would be free to form in all the layers of my thought. I would find myself energized to get them onto paper. I relearned this lesson as a performer, finding that if I practiced non-stop for more than about an hour, the quality of my practice would rapidly diminish. My focus would be shot. I'd get fixated on the wrong elements, and I would, more than anything, get bored. Doing the same thing, walking out of the practice room and doing something else, would allow my mind to do more total work over the course of a day. If I had a whole day to write, which I never have now, I found that I had to break up the day into some sort of schedule, or else I would get writer's block, even if I knew what was coming next and had done a lot of story planning. The sentences just wouldn't flow from my mind the way they normally do. What was better was writing in one block, then performing some other task, such as doing the dishes, then writing in another block, then walking to the store, then writing, then going to the gym, etc. Trying to write for 8 hours straight never yielded as many words as writing for 4 hours and doing other things in between. Your mind is like a machine. I like to think of the mind, especially with the relationship between consumption, or experience, of art, and the production of art, like a car. A car is a complicated machine, and so is your mind. You must maintain and take care of your car, or it will break down. If you don't fill it full of petrol, it will die on you. With creativity, the art you consume is like the gasoline that you put in your tank. It fills up your mind with possibilities and inspiration, which are then expended when you create. You have to fill up the tank from time to time, or the machine will not work. Likewise, you need to take time to care for the complicated machine that is your mind, a machine that, like an automobile, functions almost magically when in good condition. That means attending to your mental and emotional state is sometimes necessary. You don't stand much chance at creating when you are experiencing intense grief or anxiety. How you deal with emotional states is up to you, but I think it is generally a mistake to think you can operate at the same level as normal while in an extreme emotional state. As a side story, I actually played guitar at my father's funeral, but I was able to do this because I was extremely well practiced, with years of performance experience in all emotional states under my belt. I wouldn't have attempted it if my father had not asked it of me while he was alive, nor would I have attempted it without the experience I had as a performer at the time. This is not something I would recommend to your typical performer. I find it's better when in a difficult emotional state to do things that are enjoyable in themselves. For me, that means playing games and reading books. When your machine isn't running well, you need to take care of it and tune it up. Consuming art is also one of the best things you can do if you are experiencing post-project depression. Movies and books are things that are enjoyable first and foremost, but they also serve to wash the palate by filling up the mind with new art, which means new inspirations for new projects. Taking time after completing a large project to enjoy the art you love will remind you of why you got into your field in the first place. Inspiration is not overrated. I used to say inspiration is overrated because inspiration is not the hard work necessary to complete a project, nor is it the knowledge of the craft that is necessary to make the project good. As I've matured, I've developed a different perspective and decided that inspiration is incredibly important. It's the impetus to create as well as the destination. Yes, inspiration alone will do nothing for you, and the only way to your goals is through hard work. But do not think that having a deep feeling for what you want to create is something without value. Anything can inspire, but for me, inspiration has always come at least partially through art, either directly or in how it interacts with my memory and within present moments. The Water of Awakening, my first published fantasy novel, was in a large part inspired by the Twilight Force album, Heroes of Mighty Magic, so much so that I ended up using a painting by Karen Byatt, the band's album artist, for the cover of my book. It might be surprising for a fan to hear that, given that Twilight Force occupies not only a different medium, music rather than literature, but also a very different approach within the fantasy genre compared to my work. Their music is pure adventure escapism, like playing Dungeons & Dragons or reading Dragonlance books, such as Dragons of Autumn's Twilight. My book, and those that have followed, are much more brooding and philosophical, in the vein of Michael Moorcock. That's who I am, but Heroes of Mighty Magic made me feel like I wanted to tell a tale of high adventure, and that is what I did. To that end, I don't think it is necessary to spend all of your time consuming media that is in the field in which you are working, like books if you are an author, as inspiration can come from anywhere. However, it is important to know your own medium and genre well. You will get to know it by experiencing what other artists have done within it. Analysis and acquiring tools. One of the most important reasons to consume art is to gain the tools to produce your own. You gain these tools by observing what others have done, taking note of how they did things, and learning to use their techniques in your own work in your own way. If you are an author, pay attention to the prose of the books you read. Take note of the tone, the sentence length, and how much prose there is relative to dialogue. Observe how authors balance plot and character development. Take note of event pacing. How many pages are there between significant events? Even if you don't like a book, you will have gained from the experience if you can understand why you didn't like the book and, perhaps more importantly, why others did like it. Twilight was a fun read for me from this perspective. The prose style of Stephenie Meyer made the main character very relatable and likable, particularly, I believe, for the target demographic of young teens. There was a great balance between well-timed character interaction that slowly exposed the mysterious character and plot events that propelled the two main characters toward one another. These are lessons that can be applied to other genres to please a wide variety of readers, even though Twilight was definitely not the kind of book I would normally choose to read. Every art experience can offer you something as an artist. Your artist brain is something you shouldn't turn off. This was even the case for me when watching movies I considered truly awful, like the recent Disney Star Wars movies. Witnessing failure at least let me know what didn't work and what I didn't want to do with my own art. One interesting piece of pushback I've received when advocating an analytical approach to art consumption is that looking at something with a critical eye somehow removes the magic of the experience. While I personally don't enjoy something less because I understand what techniques are at play, removing the magic is precisely the point of analysis. If you want to be an artist, it helps to know what you were doing. Unless you were making postmodern art, I suppose, but that is another discussion entirely. You wouldn't expect an engineer to design automobiles without first learning how they work, and you wouldn't accept his desire to view cars as magical steel beasts created by wizards as an excuse for his ignorance. Artists of all stripes seem resistant to the idea of analysis, but I find it is particularly bad among musicians. Perhaps it is some combination of the opaque nature of music theory, the fact that a novice doesn't readily understand what is happening in music or why it makes him feel things, and the belief in pure emotional expression in art. The result of resistance to learning music theory is an artist who creates a highly simplistic set of musical compositions and who also experiences distress over not being able to imitate the music which inspired him to begin with. Even highly emotional art, like that of Van Gogh, is still full of technique. In his paintings, the technique is even more obvious because he makes no effort to hide his brushstrokes. Analysis is one of the best ways to learn, and I have a YouTube channel heavily devoted to it. From analysis, you can extract techniques. With techniques, you can create new art that communicates your message in the manner you envision. Keep in mind that media like films and games combine multiple disciplines. If you are a musician, a movie has a score that you can analyze. If you are a visual artist, games contain art assets you can evaluate. If you are a writer, movies contain stories, and so do most modern games, and thus there are storytelling techniques to glean from them. I should note, however, that these multimedia presentations of art are not going to be the same as the pure version. Watching a movie is not the same as reading. Movie and game scores are not composed in the same way standalone music is at all, though they may utilize the same music theory concepts. Likewise, designing an animated character is not the same thing as illustrating a static scene. You still need to know your area of expertise. What writers usually miss in analysis. One of the reasons literature majors don't automatically turn into great writers is that they tend to focus on the wrong things when it comes to analyzing fiction. Most literature classes focus on historically informed readings or the various modern and postmodern forms of criticism, like deconstructive or feminist criticism. They aren't the only ones focusing in the wrong direction. Most analysis content on the web focuses on things like themes, allegory, embedded messages, prose, and in genres like fantasy, world building, and magic systems. These elements aren't unimportant at all, but they are not what makes a story a good, memorable read. Here are some things writers should focus on instead, in no particular order. 1. Story events. What happens? What order do things happen in? What was unpredictable? What impact did the events have? 2. Dialogue. Readers get attached to characters through dialogue. 3. Character action. Readers love characters by loving what they do. 4. Pacing. Pacing has more to do with the importance of a scene and its tension than it does with the speed of prose. 5. The stakes. This is the core of the main conflict or main plot goal. How does the story matter? With these 5 things in mind, I think it is easy to see how a typical reader is going to get bored reading most attempts by new writers at literary fiction. Personal, deep stories often contain low stakes, minimal story events or story events with low importance, an abundance of prose, and many scenes of character interaction that are superfluous to the plot. Great pieces of literature will have those deep elements literature buffs care about, but also be good stories in their own right. What you focus on when you engage in analysis is just as important as taking the time to analyze in the first place.